All right. Hello, everyone. All exactly 0 of you who are here presently, but maybe some of you will watch this back. So I'm here with Miles K. Donahue. We're going to be talking about largely about the fine-tuning argument, maybe about other stuff, depending on where this conversation goes. I came across Miles because I was looking for interviews with Robin Collins, given that Robin Collins basically always has interesting things to say in interviews. And I came across the YouTube channel of some guy named Miles Donahue. And, so I watched this video and saw some of your other videos. And, I thought, you were really insightful. So I decided it would be fun to get you on the channel. So yeah, Miles, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Matthew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And for viewers wondering, the reason why both of our cameras are off is that there was a lot of lag. And so we decided that the best solution to this is to have our cameras off, unfortunately. So you won't be able to see my beautiful face, but hopefully the magnanimity of the conversation will be enough to draw you in despite that. So Miles, so you're broadly on team fine tuning. You think the fine tuning argument is a good argument?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I'm inclined to. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you about that. I think it's a good argument, but we might have some slight disagreements about it. So one thing we might disagree about, I think that the most promising atheistic response is the multiverse. And I don't think that it commits the inverse gambler's fallacy. Do you disagree with either bit?
Well, I'm still making up my mind about the inverse gambler's fallacy. I'm working on a paper about it, actually. And so I've plumbed the depths of the literature on that problem to some extent. And while my initial impression was that the objection failed, I kind of, when I first heard it, I thought, well, that obviously has to be wrong. The more I read from responses and counter responses in the philosophical literature, the less able I was to dismiss the force of the objection. So here's what I'll say. I hope that it fails because it seems like far too simple a refutation, but I'm finding it increasingly difficult to actually refute it. So I do think you and I will have productive dialogue on that objection, even if I don't have a firm view, because I do think there are certain counter responses to the objection that do fail. And that's part of my problem is I keep thinking, oh, this will be the good response. And then it's not.
All right. Yeah. Sounds good. I guess my view is I think it fails. And the reason for this is I think that when we're precise about your uncertainty, about day safe facts, about which person you are, then basically the allegedly fallacious inference vanishes. Okay, so let's consider kind of a toy model, a very small multiverse, okay, with just two universes, universe 1 and universe 2. And let's compare this to a design case that, or actually, sorry, wait. Okay, we haven't even discussed why a person might think it commits the inverse gambler's fallacy. Sorry, do you want to explain that?
Let's set some context. Yeah. So, right, the multiverse explanation for fine tuning is akin to. This is an analogy a physicist gave that if you imagine walking into a shoe shop and they only sell a single pair of shoes, it's all they've ever sold. And it fits you perfectly. It fits both your style that you enjoy and it fits the size of your foot perfectly. Well, then there would be something to explain there. That's a massive coincidence that it fits you and essentially nobody else perfectly, or very few people anyway. And so that's the analogy with a single universe that is fine-tuned for life. It's this huge coincidence. We need some explanation. But then the multiverse would be the analog of walking into a shoe shop and they have trillions of shoes of all different sizes and styles, and there happens to be one that fits you and that you like. Well, then it's no longer that coincidental. Of course, if there's a huge enough collection, there's going to be one in there that fits your liking and your foot size. So then with respect to the multiverse, it provides the same kind of explanation that there is this huge collection of universes, all varying randomly in their fundamental features. And so if this collection is big enough, then by chance, there's going to be one at least that's fine-tuned for life. And obviously we could only evolve and observe that universe. So given those two facts, on the one hand, this huge collection of randomly varying universes and this self-selection effect that we couldn't have observed any other universe, that's all there is that needs to be explained. With those two facts in place, there's nothing more left to explain. It resolves the coincidental nature of fine-tuning in that kind of way. So that's the multiverse explanation for our fine-tuned universe. The inverse gambler's fallacy is a bit technical, but the idea is that it's the charge fundamentally that the multiverse doesn't actually explain our fine-tuned universe in any way. It doesn't increase the probability of our universe existing. And the reason is that the charge is that the multiverse proponents underspecify the relevant evidence. So at most, postulating this huge collection of randomly varying universes increases the chances that some universe or other is fine-tuned for life, whichever it may be. But it does nothing to increase the probability that our universe specifically is fine-tuned for life. And so to give a simple analogy, you might flip a quarter 10 times in a row. And what are the odds that coin flip of 10, that sequence of 10 coin flips lands heads every single time? Well, it's very, very small. I think 1 times 2 to the 10th or something like that. It's very small. But then imagine that you are...
Well, it would be 1 over 2 to the 10th, not 1 times 2 to... 1
there you
times
go.
2, yeah.
There you go. Keeping me honest, Matthew. Thank you. You're right, because that would be huge. And so then the point will be that if you are but a member of a trillions and trillions and trillions of people flipping coins, well, then someone in that collection is going to observe by chance alone a coin flip landing heads 10 times. But this is the crucial point, the odds that you are that one person, that your particular coin flip will land 10 times heads, is unchanged. It's still 1 part in 10 to the 2. That's the same thing as 1 over 10 to the 2. So, or 2 to the 10. Damn it. You know what I'm saying. And so the point will be that while a multiverse can explain why some universe or other is fine-tuned for life, it can't explain why our universe is fine-tuned. The odds of that are exactly the same, whether there's one universe or a trillion universes or an infinite number, given that they are causally independent of one another on most multiverse scenarios. And you might say, well, isn't it enough to explain why some universe or other? Why do we have to explain the more specific fact that our universe is fine-tuned for life? And that's where proponents of this objection to the multiverse have delineated the requirement of total evidence as a general principle of reasoning, that when determining whether evidence supports one hypothesis over another, you have to state the evidence in the most specific or informative way, including as many relevant facts as you can, roughly. And to give an analogy, suppose you learn that someone or other in your friend group has a headache. Does that increase the probability that Donald, one particular person in your friend group, has a headache? A little bit. Say there are 5 people, and then you learn that someone or other has a headache. Well, that increases the chances that it's Donald by a bit. But then suppose you learn the more specific fact that it was actually Mark who had the headache. Does that increase the odds that it's Donald who has the headache? Well, not anymore. Once you know the more specific fact, that needs to be the relevant evidence. And then that specific fact no longer increases the probability that Donald has a headache. Similarly, once we know that it is our fine-tuned universe that exists, that our universe specifically is fine-tuned for life, then that needs to be the evidence by which we judge the multiverse versus a design hypothesis versus some other explanation. And when we plug in that specific fact, the multiverse is no more likely than before we learned about our specific fine-tuned universe, because the multiverse does nothing to increase the odds that this universe specifically is fine-tuned for life. So that's the inverse gambler's fallacy objection, or this universe objection to the multiverse as an explanation for fine-tuning.
Yeah. So my view is that I agree with people who make this objection that one should not understate the evidence, that you want to include our total evidence. But I think when you're precise about our total evidence, and specifically when you're precise that our total evidence doesn't includes uncertainty about which of the universes in the multiverse we're in, then I think you end up getting an update in favor of the multiverse. Okay, so let's just consider a toy model. Let's suppose that there are two hypotheses. Hypothesis one is that there's a single life-permitting universe that's designed. And hypothesis two is that there are two universes, and one of them is life-permitting and the other one's not. So just to make it so that these have equal priors, let's say a coin gets flipped. If it comes up heads, the first one if it comes up heads, then there's just one universe and it's designed. And if it comes up tails, then there are two universes, and one of them at random is life permitting. So in both cases, heads or tails both means that there's one life permitting universe. If heads, it's the only universe, and if tails, it's either the first or the second universe across two universes. So I think that at least on a small scale, this case is relevantly analogous to the tails explanation is relevantly analogous to the multiverse, at least a very small multiverse, certainly. If you wanted to be more analogous, it would be that basically there are 10 to the power of 500 of the universes on tails, and one of them is life permitting. But the same point I think will apply with tails. And then I think when you take into account your uncertainty about who you are and which universe you're in, then you don't get any update against the multiverse. So in my view, there are 4 events that you should regard as having equal probability. There are 3 events that might be the case. The first event is you're in universe 1, and you're in the first universe, and that's the only universe. Scenario 2 is you're in the first universe, and there's also a second universe. And scenario 3 is you're in the second universe, and there are universes 1 and 2. And so I think you should think there's a 50% chance that you're in universe 1, and that's the only one. Then, conditional on there being 2 universes, you split your credence evenly across you being in each of the universes. And so then overall, you end up with the conclusion that there's a 50% chance that it came up heads, and you're in the one universe, 25% chance that you're in the first universe and it came up tails, and 25% chance that you're in the second universe and it came up tails. Overall, you don't get any update in favor of heads over tails. Where I think the understated evidence charge goes wrong is if you take into account the most specific fact, which is that, so the most specific evidence is that I exist in this universe. But the point is you don't actually know which universe this is relative. If we think of the multiverse as generating universes in some order, there are different ways we might classify universes. One of them is we can sort of give them artificial labels, right? So maybe you give the universes numbers according to the order in which they were generated. And if you do that, then you don't know which universe you're in. And so then you just take into account your uncertainty about which universe you're in the way I described before. And then you know that you're in, and then you don't get any update in favor of heads over tails. The other way you might do it is you might have universes be exhaustively defined in terms of their qualitative components. So you might think, what I mean by this universe is the universe that has all the qualities of the universe that I'm in. But then a multiverse just does raise the probability of there being a universe like that, because it means that there are more universes, and you might only find yourself in one of the universes that have agents at all. Sorry, I think that was not the most clear way I've explained that, but I don't know. Was that clear enough?
Clear enough for me to ask clarifying questions.
Okay,
because you might be right here. I don't have a firm view, and so I'm open-minded. It's interesting in that first case where you said that there's a 50% credence we're in the fine-tuned universe that is designed, and then we have that 50% probability that we're in this simplified multiverse but then of course there's only two, and so there's a 25% probability it's in one and 25 in the other. What is that supposed to represent? Because we know that we're in a fine-tuned universe. It's impossible for us to be in that one universe in the multiverse that's not fine-tuned. So what epistemic situation was that original
So that
distribution of probabilities meant to represent?
So that was supposed to represent. So we know that we are in a finely tuned universe, but we don't know which universe in the multiverse this one happens to be, right? So if we think of the multiverse as having two universes, this very small multiverse model, we know we're in whichever one is finely tuned, but we don't know if the one that's finely tuned is the first one or the second one.
Okay. So you're looking for, okay. So I think I'm starting to see, you're looking for a way to distinguish between the identity of universes in the multiverse and those things that we have access to in defining our universe. Because my initial response was, well, we know we're in this universe where this rigidly designates the universe we're in. So how is that any different? Like when you're asking which universe in the multiverse are we in, I would say, well, this one. So what content can you give to a universe in the multiverse that's not exhausted by me just saying, well, we're in this one right here?
Well, so if you just say we're in this one, right. So if you think, there's only one that we could be in, and it's this one, and you don't have some way of individuating the universes, then I think that this one just is likelier. So we know that if we have to find ourselves in this one, we can't find ourselves in any other one. And this one just is likelier to exist if there's a multiverse, because if there's a multiverse, the probability of there being a universe with all of the qualitative features of our universe is higher.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because I think you're right. When I would specify this universe, I would mean ultimately I'd be I'm pointing in a way. I'm saying this one right here. And maybe I don't know all of the essential features of this universe versus others, but I can at least designate it intelligibly. So then, if you define a universe as all of its qualitative features, and maybe there are also non-qualitative features like the Hesiody of each universe, and I just mean this one, this Hesiody and these qualitative features, say something more, I guess, about why a multiverse increases the likelihood that a universe with this qualitative description would exist, because that might help me.
Well, so if a multiverse creates a bunch of different if a multiverse creates a bunch of different people, creates a bunch of different values of the constants, then the odds that you would get the values of the constants that we have in this world are higher on the multiverse than if you just had a single universe. So I think both multiverse and design with roughly equal probability predict that there will be at least one universe like this one. And the point is, well, we could have only found ourselves in this one. So it's not surprising that that this if you have this one just pick out so you use this one basically to point to our universe. But in order for the total evidence challenge to go through, you have to say, well, but pointing to that there is a finely tuned world it doesn't suffice for it to be the case that this world is finely tuned, because there's some sense in which one of the other ones could have been finely tuned. And my point is that if there is a sense in which one of the other ones could have been finely tuned, then of the different ones that could have been finely tuned, we don't know which of them in fact is finely tuned. And so if we split our credence across the different possibilities of the ones that are finely tuned, then we end up getting an update. Then we end up getting no update in favor of the design hypothesis. Right? So either you think that there is something about our universe where it being finely tuned doesn't suffice to either there's something about our universe where in order to get us in this universe, basically all you need is to get a universe with the right qualitative features. Or sorry, these are confusing concepts.
Let me ask you a
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
It's complicated. We're at a very high level of abstraction, and this is a complicated objection. I mean, even Philip Goff, when he was in the process of writing his paper on this objection, went, "Holy shit, this is complicated." And I agree. So, do you think that our universe could have evolved differently into a non-life permitting universe? That this very universe could have assumed different values of the constants? Let's start there. Or would it have been a different universe if the values were different? Like, does this universe have all its features essentially, or does it have non-essential features? And so this very universe could exist with different qualities.
So I don't know. I think it might be a semantic question, but I think however you answer it, the inverse Gambor's fallacy charge doesn't go through.
Okay.
So so if you think that this universe couldn't have been any other way, then us finding ourselves in this universe just basically is the same as there being a universe like this, because we couldn't have found ourselves in any other. Now, then if you think instead that if you think the opposite, and that this universe could have had a different could have had different extrinsic features. So like a model for this is let's give each universe just like a number, okay? And then let's say the multiverse model is basically a random one of the numbered universes is life permitting. So there's one life permitting universe and it's a random number, and all the other ones are not life permitting. And let's say there are 10 universes. Well, if we do that, then given that we don't know which universe this one, like we know that this one rigidly designates whichever one is actual, but we don't know which one in fact is actual, right? We don't know if it's universe 1, universe 2, universe 3, universe 4. And so taking into account our uncertainty about it, we'll split our credence across the multiverse, our multiverse credence across the 10 different universes that we might be in. And then we won't get any update overall in favor of the design hypothesis.
So, or rather, what would you make the stronger claim? We would get an update in favor of the multiverse?
Yeah, more precisely, I think if there are two possibilities, one of them is that there's a designer, and one of them is that there's a multiverse. Assuming they predict the same number of life-permitting universes, then I think you won't get any update in favor of either.
So it might help me to translate this into like a coin toss, and then that'll test the intuitions a bit. So I guess we would say there are 10 different series of coin tosses, or 10 different coins laid out. And they would have to be numbered 1 to 10. And we flip our coin without knowing its number, and we see that it has... this won't work out because it would still be ridiculously improbable 10. I think the idea holds. We see that it has 5 heads in a row. But we don't know its number from 1 to 10, so we don't know which of the 10 it is. But we know it is this coin in a sense. We can look at it. We can see it. We know it's a specific coin of the 10, and it's not the other 9 that are out there. So then the question is, does the fact that that coin came up 5 times confirm the multiple coin hypothesis over where there are 10 coins over the hypothesis that there's only 1 coin?
No.
Is that an analogy at least? Is that a good analogy?
Wait, sorry. Maybe I didn't fully get the setup. Okay, so there are 10 different coin tosses. We flip our coin and see that it has 5 heads in a row. And you're asking, that...
Yeah, I think I have to build it out a bit more. So the first, instead of saying that there are 10, we don't know if there are other coin tosses or not. But if there are, then we know that there are 10 coins labeled 1 to 10. We don't know which of those coins, which of the numbers is on our coin. We just know the result of the coin toss. And the result of our specific coin toss was 5 heads in a row. So then the question is, does that fact of it coming up 5 times confirm the multi-coin hypothesis over the single coin hypothesis? That seems at least to be parallel to the
I
the
think
multiverse explanation.
it doesn't, and the disanalogy is that we could have. There's a selection effect regarding the original coin toss. So you could have found yourself in a place where you got 5 heads in a row, where you got other than 5 heads in a row. But in contrast, we could only have found ourselves in a life permitting universe. And so, in contrast, if the coin toss were required for us to find ourselves in the universe at all, so if basically only if they got 10 heads, then like a spirit would be created and you get created, then you should think that almost certainly the multi-coin toss hypothesis is correct.
Okay, so let's give the usual countercharge in the literature because things get complicated with these thought experiments. But let's introduce a self-selection effect to our coin analogy, and we'll say that in this iteration of the thought experiment, everything is the same except you only view the results when they are complete. So you only know what the series of coin tosses on your specific coin was once it's done, and someone is standing beside you with a gun, and if it doesn't land 5 heads, you get shot. You're killed. You don't get to see it. But if it lands heads 5 times, you get to observe it and see it. And so, obviously, you know, if you're still alive, opening your eyes and looking at it, that, well, you would know this anyway, but you know it's 5 heads. You know you survived. So there's a self-selection effect here. If you have any observations at all post coin toss, it's going to be because it landed heads 5 times. So now the question is, does the fact that you have these observation of 5 heads in a row confirm the multi-coin hypothesis? Maybe it does. I mean, I'm really at this point just setting it up and asking, trying to clarify things.
Yeah, here I think it doesn't. Well, and I think exactly whether it does will depend on your view of anthropics. So there are kind of 3 leading views of anthropics. One of them is called compartmentalized conditionalization, on which what compartmentalized conditionalization holds is basically that if you have some experience, theories are likelier proportional to the probability that if they were true, someone would have your exact experiences. And so on compartmentalized conditionalization, I guess if you think that the people then the fact that you wake up does give you evidence for the multi-coin hypothesis, because it raises the probability that someone would have your exact experiences of surviving. But I think compartmentalized conditionalization is very implausible.
Okay.
The other 2 views of anthropics will generally hold that you don't get any update in this case. One of them is the self-sampling assumption. What it holds is that you should treat yourself as randomly selected from among the people that exist. So according to the self-sampling assumption, you should see yourself as randomly selected from among the people that there are. And then, so you're sort of equally likely to be any of the people. But then whoever you happen to be, it's no likelier that you would survive if there are more other people. So while SSA will generally think that from you having certain properties, you should think there are other people who don't have those properties. From you surviving, it won't get any update. And then the last one is SIA, which says that if you have some experience, you should update in favor of hypotheses according to which more people have those experiences, right? So if you have some exact set of experiences, if one theory says there are 10 times as many people who have that experience, then that theory gets a 10-to-1 update over a theory that says that there's one person who has that experience. So on SIA, it doesn't matter the ratio of people, what percentage of the people survive. SIA just always favors the multiverse because you should just inevitably think that there are more copies of you, more people who have the same experiences as you, whether or not you survive, and the update's the same whether or not you survive. So I think there's both of the kind of leading theories of anthropics will be able to explain why there's a disanalogy.
I'll have to think about that more. It's the first time I'm hearing about anthropics, so I clearly need to do more investigation of the literature and the arguments. So But let me ask a more general question that gets back to a point you made earlier, that the multiverse ultimately, if we define a universe qualitatively as this ginormous collection of certain qualitative properties and attributes, then the multiverse does increase the odds that our universe will exist, because it just postulates so many randomly varying qualitative features that if you exemplify more of those random combinations, the odds of getting any particular one are higher. The usual charge then is that the multiverse then is no longer an explanation for fine-tuning, because then it would seem that no matter how the universe was, no matter what our observations were, no matter whether the universe was observable or not, the fact that a particular universe exists would increase the odds that a multiverse exists. And so then any fact whatsoever becomes confirmation of the multiverse. And that, in most people's mind, well, in some people's minds, indicates that something has gone wrong here. If any fact whatsoever is confirmation of a multiverse, then our reasoning has gone wrong. We've kind of left fine-tuning behind. It's not fine-tuning that's doing the explanatory work. It's just a specific universe with whatever properties that's doing the work. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that so I don't think every observation would update in favor of the multiverse, because the probability. So I think the fact that you exist at all does give you an update in favor of the multiverse. The view of anthropics that I think is right is the last one I said, on which you having some experience gives you evidence that there are more people having the experience. So, like, for, if a coin gets flipped that creates one person of heads and 10 people of tails, this view says that would hold that tails is 10 times likelier than heads. So on that view, I think the fact that you exist is good evidence for a multiverse, for thinking that there are infinite people, in fact. But you don't get any additional update from, like, I don't know, mundane observations, because the probability of you having the mundane observations conditional on there being a multiverse is no higher than conditional on there not being a multiverse. So if you knew that there was a multiverse, you wouldn't expect with any higher probability that you would have the mundane observations.
Well, why are you allowed? It seems like that kind of reasoning is what you would expect, given a certain kind of multiverse anyway, is that there are every single combination of possible observations and properties of a universe. And so, let's take a simple one of, I knocked my cup of coffee over and it spilled just now. Does that fact increase the likelihood of a multiverse? Well, couldn't you give a parallel argument and say that, well, the more universes there are, the more qualitative descriptions that are instantiated, the more likely it is that there will be this phenomenon of spilling this cup of coffee over. Perhaps not mine, but this cup of coffee over. And so the fact that we do observe it increases the likelihood that there's a multiverse, because the multiverse will increase the odds that there is this happening of spilling coffee, because it increases the odds of everything.
Well, here I think this is understating the evidence. So it's true that the multiverse. So I think a multiverse raises the odds of your existence, and so for that reason, you should update.
Now, why is that? Why does it increase? Why does it increase the odds of my existence? Mine.
Well, okay, I could answer that, but that would take us down. My answer would be kind of long. So
okay.
But I mean, I think it'll get a bit into the theory of anthropics. I mean, I guess here's one way. But right. So I think it'll increase the probability of your existence, but then conditional on you existing, what will raise the probability of someone like you having the experience of spilling coffee? It won't raise the relative probability that you in particular will have the experience of spilling coffee. So just like if you were trying to bet on the odds that you would spill coffee, being informed that there was a multiverse wouldn't have any relevance.
Yes.
It wouldn't have any relevance.
Yes. If you say conditional on my existence. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I have to think about this more. What I would like to know is, are your views on this, do they draw from a particular publication or author? Because I would want to look at them, or is this Matthew original insight? Either way, I want to know more.
So, I mean, there was a paper, I haven't read that much of the literature. There was a paper by Yoav Isaacs and John Hawthorne that
Yeah.
that I was largely in agreement with. And they make the point about how the inference fails on each of the leading theories of anthropics.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I have not read very much of the literature. It's mostly my own thoughts about it. I guess, sorry, yeah, okay.
Oh no, I was just going to say, so yeah, I've read that paper, but I found it on first run through very difficult to understand, so I have to read it again. But what I was going to say is, when I finish a draft of this paper, I would love it if you would look it over and let me know what you think, because
yeah,
I think you'd have some good analysis.
Yeah, sounds good. I'd be happy to.
Cool.
Regarding my earlier criticism, let me take another stab at explaining it, because I think my earlier explanation wasn't clear. So I think there are two possibilities. Either we could have been in different universes or not. If we could have been in a different universe, then if we couldn't have been in a different universe, if basically we have to be in this universe, then I think insofar as a theory predicts that this universe exists, all the agents will find themselves in this universe. So yes. The multiverse. So if we couldn't have been in any other universe, then I think the multiverse will explain our existence just as well as the single universe, because in both cases there's just one universe that we might have found ourselves in. So there's nothing surprising about why we find ourselves in this universe rather than another one, if we think that there's some deep sense in which we couldn't have found ourselves in another one. Now, the other possibility is that we could have been in a different universe. But then I think if you think we could have been in a different universe, then our probability ends up just being smeared out across the possible multiverses. And then you get the situation looking more like the coin flip toy model, where a heads means there's a single finely tuned universe, and tails means there are two universes, 1 and 2, and one of them is finely tuned to be life permitting at random. Where in that case, well, if you take into account the most specific evidence, which is I'm in this universe, but you don't know which universe this one is, right? You don't know, it's this one, but you don't know which universe is referred to by this one. And so when you split your credence across the ones it might be, you conclude there's a 50% chance you're in the one finely tuned universe that exists on the heads world, a 25% chance you're in the first finely tuned universe on the tails world, and a 25% chance you're in the second finely tuned universe on the tails world. And so overall, when you take all of this into account, you end up indifferent between the two hypotheses. You end up getting no update
on either one.
Right. Assuming they both predict one life permitting universe.
Okay. Yeah, well, again, I'll have to think more about that. I think it seems to, I don't know if you share the impression, but this objection seems to raise like several fundamental issues at once in epistemology that make it quite difficult to assess. I mean, multiple people have complained about the proliferation of thought experiments and counter thought experiments in trying to adjudicate when it's reasonable to make an inference to more trials. It's very tough. It's very tough. So I think it's a worthwhile area of investigation, and I'll have to think more about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky area to think through. Okay, so now that we've resolved that, I can answer in more detail your earlier question, which is why I think that your existence is more likely in a multiverse. I think that's what you asked. Mm-hmm. So okay, the way I see it, okay, let's consider another toy model involving coin flips. Okay, let's say that there one universe is created that has one person in it, and then a coin gets flipped, and if it comes up tails, then 9 other universes are created that have people in it, and if it comes up heads, no other people are created. So suppose that you get created in this universe and you don't know your birth rank. Well, so I think this can help illustrate why you should think that that a multiverse makes it likelier that you exist where I think you don't know your birth rank, so you should hold the following judgment. You should think the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up heads equals the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails. After all, if you learn that you are the first person, you would think that the coin that hasn't been flipped yet is equally likely to come up heads and tails. But the odds that you're the first person and the coin has come up tails equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails, which equals the odds that you're...
Sorry, say that one more time. Say that one more time.
Oh, the odds that you're the first person and the coin has come up, and the coin will come up tails, equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails. So remember, if it's one person's created, then a coin's flipped, and if it comes up tails, 9 other people are created. So you're created and you don't know your birth rank. You should think the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails. Because conditional on the coin coming up tails, you're equally likely to be people 1 and 2.
Okay, by second person, do you mean belonging to the second group of universes?
Yeah, sorry, belonging to this. I was imagining that each universe had only one person, so I meant the one person in universe 2.
Okay.
Okay, so the odds that you're the single person, so maybe I can write this out in the private chat. Maybe that would be helpful. So odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up heads equals the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails. But the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails. But that equals the odds that you're the third person and the coin has come up tails, which equals the odds you're the fourth person and the coin has come up tails, and which equals the odds you're the fifth person and the coin has come up tails, and so on. And so just extrapolating this, you end up with the conclusion that it's 10 times likelier that the coin came up tails than heads, where tails predicted 10 universes rather than 1.
Okay, so why do we grant what's in that second block of text? The odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails. I would think that the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails is probably 1 in 9, right? That would be reasonable because this is 9 people coming into being. You don't know which universe you're in. And so the odds that you're in that number 2 universe as opposed to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is 1 in 9. So is that part anyway clear enough?
Well, I don't think that's correct. I think it's 1 in 11 because, first of all, there's some probability.
Well, I'm thinking given though that there is a collection, that given that it, I guess that probability would be given that it's come up tails, the odds that you're the second person is 1 in 9. Is that much?
Oh, well then it would be 1 in 10 because there's the one person before the coin flip that you might be.
Okay. The odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails equals the odds that you're the second person and the coin has come up tails. Right. Okay. Well, I see the argument. I don't, and so then the odds are all the in a nutshell idea is that if the odds of being in any particular universe in any order are all the same, then the conjunctive odds, the conjunction of the odds of being in this second group of universes is much higher than just being the solely created universe that came up heads.
Right. I mean, more precisely, I think each of the premises are just very hard to deny. Where, I mean, the first premise is just the odds that you're the first person, the coin will come up tails and will come up heads equals the odds that you're the first person and the coin will come up tails. Right. If you were informed that you're the first person, you should think it's equally likely that it will come up heads as tails. And so for that reason, you should think the odds that you're the first person and it'll come up tails equals the odds you're the first person and it'll come up heads. And then you should think, well, but on tails, if it comes up tails, the odds are only 1 in 10 that I'd be the first person. So then I should think the odds that I'm the first person is as likely, and the odds that I'm the first person and it'll come up heads is as likely as a scenario that's only 1/10 of the tails probability space. And so overall, tails is 10 times likelier than heads.
Okay, I think that's a useful thought experiment. That will help guide my thoughts as I work on this paper, because I don't see the problem with it. I cannot refute it.
Yeah, I do have a paper about this if you're interested in reading it.
Yes. Send it to me. That would be great.
Yeah, actually, so before before we went live, we talked a bit about. So I mentioned that I had an argument for the existence of God, one that an original one. So I mean, it's very related to this. It's funny that we ended up getting almost to this topic. But so the basic idea is, if you grant this principle where your existence is likelier if there are more people, where like if a coin gets flipped that creates 1 person if heads and 10 if tails, then tails is 10 times likelier than heads. Well, if that's right, then you should be certain that there are infinite people, right? Because if there are infinite people, then it's infinitely likelier that you would exist. But this doesn't just stop at infinity, because there are bigger and smaller infinities. So following this logic, you should think that the number of people that exists is whatever the most people is that there could be. And then if the number of people that exists is the most that there could be, then, well, theism has a nice explanation of that, because a lower bound on the number of people that there could be is like a gargantuan infinity, way too big to fit in a non-horrendously gerrymandered multiverse. So from the fact that you exist, you should think that the number of people that exist is the most that there could be, which is really, really big infinity. And then theism is the best explanation of that fact, because theism, if there's a perfect God who wants to create and has no limits on how much he can create, the odds of creating a giant infinity worth of people are pretty high. While if on atheism, at best you'll get a small infinity. Probably you'll get finite numbers of people, if you get any people at all.
So this would be making use of Kliman-Haga's model of the multiverse. Is that right? Where he argues that all possible people exist, that God has created all possible people, but it's turning that into a theistic argument. Is that where you
I think
originally got the idea, or
no, it's not. I don't think I've read, or maybe I've read the Kliman-Haga thing. I think I do slightly disagree. So like there's a way of so I agree that you get every possible person, I think. Though I actually don't think the argument needs the assumption that every possible person's created. It just needs the assumption that a giant infinity worth of people is created, more than is likely to exist on atheism. But I think there is a, like, I think I maybe did read the Kliman-Haga paper, and I think I would have a slight disagreement, which is the way he thinks of it is that basically what theism predicts is like modal realism, but only the good half of worlds. So God creates all the worlds that are good, which is like just modal realism minus the bad worlds. And I think this is slightly the wrong way of thinking about it. What I think God does is he creates every possible person, and then he puts them each in a world that's ideal for their flourishing. And so you get the same number of people, but it's people first rather than worlds first.
Well, so on my reading of Kliman-Haga, that's what he's saying. He's saying the second thing. He kind of makes explicit that he disagrees with these theistic multiverse models that put universes first, and that we should instead think God creates all possible people and then determines which particular universes to place them in. So I think he would actually agree with you.
Okay. I think I misread what, or maybe I don't know if I read the Kliman-Haga thing.
Well,
but yeah.
Regardless, I mean, your point is original, and so I take it the structure of the argument is that we've already established that a gargantuan infinity of people exist, and then we are asking, all right, how do we explain that? Is that the structure? You there?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you get my question?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I said yes.
Okay. So then let's just grant that first point, because then that would take us into the same conversation we've already had. Let's grant that there are a gargantuan infinity of people. I don't know that we can get traction on the likelihoods here. That given theism, what's the likelihood that we'd have this gargantuan infinity? Given atheism, what's the gargantuan infinity? One problem is that atheism is a huge disjunction of alternatives. And I don't know how to begin to get any mileage on pulling out a general likelihood from this huge disjunction of non-theistic alternatives, a likelihood that there'd be a gargantuan infinity of people. So I guess that's the first half of my question is, how do we argue that given atheism, the likelihood of this huge collection is low? How do we, or is not as high as theism? How do we ground that?
So I think part of it is just the odds are pretty high on theism. If you accept that it's good to create a person and give them a good life, which I think is very plausible, then I think the odds of God creating a giant infinity worth of people, like I think they're actually really high. Like I would say they're like 90% or something. In contrast, now maybe you think that's a little bit too high. So maybe you think it's like, 40% or something. But you can at least tell a plausible story about why God might do this that appeals to fairly widely accepted principles in philosophy, like that it's good to create. In contrast, on atheism is this, as you say, it's this massive disjunct of different theories. But I mean, first of all, a lot of of the atheistic probability space will be on naturalism. And so if you have some kind of basic natural laws that either make a single universe or a multiverse, there's this basic problem that you need to gerrymander things to a really great degree in order to get a large enough number of people, where like the size of this infinity, that's the lower bound on how many possible people there are, is more than the number of numbers that there are. And so you need to do some really sort of artificial shenanigans in order to get the right number of people. And I think the probability of those shenanigans on atheism is low. The other thing is, it's true, yeah, there are a lot of atheistic views, but basically, of the atheistic views that have ever been proposed by anyone that I know of, there are only two of them that predict a large enough number of people. Those two are modal realism and the Max Tegmark view that every mathematical structure is instantiated. And I mean, I just think conditional on atheism, only a very, very small percentage of your probability space should be on these theories, particularly because I think these theories have massive problems, including, most troublingly, undermining induction. The final point is, I think there's a principled reason to expect any atheistic theory, actually absent some very special modifications, that gets the right number of people to undermine induction. Where the core problem is, if you have this many people, there will be, let's say you think that so there are different infinities. Let's say you get Beth 2 people. Let's say that's the number of possible people. I think it's more than that, but okay, let's say it's Beth 2. If you have Beth 2 people, almost certainly you'll have Beth 2 people, both deceived and non-deceived. So you'll have Beth 2 deceived people. And I don't think there's a nice way of taking a measure over people in ways that make it so that we can say, well, there are Beth 2 people, but probably who are deceived, but probably I'm not going to be one of them, right? Because if there are Beth 2 people who are deceived and Beth 2 people who are not deceived, then basically for every non-deceived person, you could pair them up with for every non-deceived person, you could pair them with 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 deceived people. And so while we normally think we're not deceived because the universe is set up so that the deceived people are rare, really that's just a question of distribution. And just by rearranging the people in the universe, you could make it so that the universe is almost entirely filled with deceived people. So if the cardinality of the non-deceived people isn't higher than the cardinality of the deceived people, And by deceived, I don't just mean like in error about a small thing, but just like in error about everything. Then I don't think you can trust your rational faculties.
Mm.
And these can include people who are like on planets about to be destroyed by gamma rays or something, so they would never find out. And I think theism has a way out of this, where the theist can say God places everyone in a world ideal for their flourishing. The probability for any particular person that the world ideal for their flourishing will involve them being deceived is low. So then, even though there are technically no more deceived people than non-deceived people, every particular person should think it's unlikely that they're deceived. So I think theism, like an analogy might be, imagine you're in Hilbert's hotel and there are infinite copies of you and you all rolled dice. There are going to be an infinite number of people who get 1 through 5 and an infinite number of people who get 6. There are actually no more people who get 1 through 5 than 6, right? For both, you could pair the people who get 1 through 5, you could pair them up with the people who get 6. But despite that, you should think probably you will get 1 through 5, because the way you calculate probabilities with infinite classes like this isn't just taking a bare frequency over which people have each property. So you should still think with 5/6 probability that you'll get 1 through 5. I think with theism, the situation is the same, but on alternative views, it undermines induction.
Yeah. So I think one question will be why we ought to give a prior probability to theism that's higher than these more specific atheistic alternatives that do predict all possible people. So say modal realism or Max Tegmark's view. Well, I think that theism is a priori more likely. I mean, I agree with you that these two theories take up a very small share of the probability space of atheism. But it's not like we begin with theism and atheism 50-50. Rather, theism is just as specific an alternative metaphysical view as Tegmark's hypothesis. And so you have to give some argument for thinking that theism has a higher prior probability. And maybe you have one, but that would be the move that I'm sure the atheist would initially make, is that you have to show that this specific metaphysical alternative, theism, has a higher likelihood than Tegmark's hypothesis or modal realism or other specific atheistic alternatives. So, and then the question is, okay, so these two alternatives, do they undermine induction? Or it seems like you could make two separate points, one about induction and then one about mass or global skepticism. And so, but you might mean those as the same point. Did you mean those as the same?
Yeah,
point?
sorry. Yeah. I meant those as the same point. I think that basically on the Tegmark and modal realism view, all your credences and everything turn out undefined.
Well, that's interesting, because my initial response is to think that our perceptions, sensory perceptions or any other, that would be obviously undermined in a scenario in which I'm deceived, those are prima facie justified. And merely being told that there's no way to compute the relative number of deceived and undeceived people in the Tegmark multiverse, that doesn't constitute a defeater of my perceptions. You'd have to show that the number of deceived does outweigh the number of undeceived. Otherwise, we're just left with a bare possibility, and the bare possibility is not enough to defeat the justification that attends my perceptions.
Okay, so imagine a case where there's one galaxy and it has 1,000 deceived people and one non-deceived person. Okay, and you're in that galaxy. Should you think you're probably deceived?
Yeah, that seems right.
Now,
at least you have strong evidence that you are deceived.
Okay, now let's imagine that you copy that same galaxy infinite times. Right, so you make infinite galaxies, and each one has one non-deceived person and 1,000 deceived people. In that case, do you think you should think you're probably deceived?
One, you said same thing, but that galaxy is now replicated an infinite number of times.
Yeah, or well, it doesn't have to be the same galaxy, but there are an infinite number of galaxies, each of which
all of them though having that same proportion.
Yeah.
Yes, but things become undefined now, because as you yourself said, you can get different probabilities just by rearranging people. I mean, I could say, imagine you're in a galaxy with one person that is deceived and 1,000 that are not deceived. Well, you should think that you're not deceived. Okay, now imagine there are an infinite number of copies of this configuration of this galaxy. Should you think that you're not deceived? Well, it would seem the answer is yes. But that's because of how the people are, even though there are identical quantities of undeceived and deceived, they are just arranged differently in this second case. But the point I'm making is that we don't know how to determine which of those two scenarios Max Tegmark's hypothesis actualizes.
Right. Okay. So
and for that reason, we don't have a defeater.
Yeah. So in this case, you think that you should think you're deceived, right? Or
which one? In the first one, as you've pointed, it does seem right to say that in this infinitely replicated multiverse, you should think you're not deceived, but I'm not sure about that. So I'll grant it to you for the time being. Provisionally.
Yeah. Right. I mean, okay. So the worry is if you think that you should think in this case that you're deceived because each galaxy has 1,000 deceived people and one not deceived person, then, well, you could just move, like this scenario is structurally the same as basically every scenario where there are the same cardinality of deceived and non-deceived people. Where, the only difference is in this case, the people are rearranged differently, but you could rearrange the galaxies just by moving the people around so that every galaxy has 1,000 deceived people. Sorry, 1,000 non-deceived people and only one deceived person.
Yes.
So I guess.
Well, that's right. That's what I mean is that there's conflicting intuitions here, because wouldn't you agree that if you're in a galaxy with 1,000 undeceived and one deceived, you should think you're probably not deceived. Okay, multiply that same galaxy an infinite number of times. Well, then with equal force, I think the intuition would say, oh, I'm not deceived. But all you got to do is rearrange people and you can convert from one scenario to the other. And so I think that there's just no way to ground a expectation or proportion of deceived to undeceived in something like Max Tegmark's huge
so I guess
ensemble.
I mean, so suppose we want to like right. Okay, so I agree with that. I guess at this point, to me, it seems like, because you can't say that most of the people, like it's if you can't say that most of the people with your experiences are not deceived, if you don't have any reason to think that, then assuming you don't have any, well, okay, yeah, maybe that, yeah, I'll have to.
Because then you get, that's where I would direct your thoughts, because I don't know that this is a knockdown objection, but like I was always, as a child, impressed by the fact that I could have my exact perceptions right now, but still be in the Matrix or dreaming or deceived by an evil demon. And it's like, do I really have evidence that that's not happening? Well, some people will contend in epistemology that we've got evidence for or evidence against these hypotheses, but I suspect that's the wrong kind of response. Rather, the best we can do is to say that our perceptions are prima facie justified, and so long as we don't have a reason to think that these skeptical scenarios are true, then we don't have a defeater of our perceptions.
Yeah,
and I would want to say the same thing goes on here.
So I agree with the broad, like, epistemological point. I agree you should have a default trust in your intuitions and that you need a defeater for them. My thought is that finding out that there are infinite deceived people and no more non-deceived people than deceived people serves as a defeater for it. Where, I mean, it like, this is how we would treat other probabilities, right? So suppose that there are infinite people with red shirts and blue shirts who are created, and you can't see your shirt color. In this case, we would say that your credence in you having a blue shirt ought to be undefined, right? And so this is how we treat other cases. So I guess I think maybe if it doesn't, even if it doesn't lead to global skepticism, it will lead to local skepticism. of the form like where we just can't make lots of ordinary probability judgments. So like we wouldn't be able to make probability judgments about things of the form like it's so like here's something you might think is a kind of ordinary judgment that we want to make. We'd want to say it's more likely that we would find ourselves not 1,255,345 meters from the edge of the galaxy than that we would. But on this view, I think our credence in that would be undefined, because our trust in that judgment isn't like a Moorian fact. And you get the same cardinality of people who are that many meters from the edge of the galaxy as who are not.
So with respect to that shirt analogy, that's right. The probability is just undefined, but I just don't think that's analogous to the situation with sense perceptions, for instance, because there's not in that analogous case some external source of warrant for the belief in question that your shirt is a particular color. Rather, you just don't have any belief to begin with. You have no warrant to begin with. And if we agree that our sense perceptions or intuitions generally are prima facie warranted, that is our source of warrant. And then the question is it defeated by learning that there is an indeterminate number of deceived and undeceived? And the second analogy just doesn't capture that, because you have no warranted belief about your shirt to begin with.
Right. I guess my intuition is that if you find out some like global fact about the distribution of people with some property, your overall credence in you having the property doesn't depend on the details of what the property is, assuming no part of your sense data like rules out you having the property, right? So my intuition is that in this case, like we should treat shirt color and whether you're deceived similarly.
Well, right.
Yeah, I guess it is a bit hard to articulate. Like I feel so. I guess in finite cases, if most of the people are deceived, then we would say that defeats your intuitive judgment that you're not deceived. I guess it seems like it seems like for a kind of similar reason, if there's an infinite case where the fraction of people that are deceived is undefined, like, I don't know, I have the intuition that it would work similarly. I'll have to think more about if there's a way of like precisely ironing it out.
Yeah, I think a thought experiment where you could make it tightly analogous to perceptions and our warrant. We initially have warrant, and then we learn this indeterminate infinite fact, and we no longer have warrant. That would, I think, be a powerful intuition pump to get to the conclusion you need. I just am skeptical that we can draw out skeptical inferences from merely indeterminate likelihoods and possibilities like that.
Okay, so what do you make of this argument that that there are some kinds of judgments that we'd want to make that will be very hard to make if this is right? So, for example, that I don't have cancer doesn't seem like a Moorian fact, right? It seems like the reason why we think that we don't have cancer is that most people don't have cancer. But if it turns
by Moorian fact, what do you mean by that? I mean, I know Moore's argument in external world skepticism, but what does that specifically mean?
What I meant, and I don't think that was a good way of phrasing it, but what I meant was a fact for which you get kind of like basic justification.
Sure.
Right. So like that I don't have cancer is not some fact for which I have basic justification. The way that you infer it is by knowing the low cancer rates. But now on this view, it seems like, your judgment that most people don't have cancer turns out false, because there are the same number of people or the same cardinality of people with cancer and without cancer. And of course, just by rearranging the people, you could make every galaxy be filled almost exclusively with people who have cancer. And so if that's right, it seems like it makes maybe if it doesn't lead to global skepticism, but just it'll indict all these kind of like normal local inferences, like that you don't have cancer.
I think if you include nothing in the background information, but that's not how we reason ever. We delimit the space of possibility by including certain facts in our background. So if I specify that I find myself on this planet Earth with this history and these statistical facts about the distribution of cancer here, then you'll still have the same exact low probability or low likelihood that I have cancer.
Yeah, but there I don't think that. So yeah, you find yourself on planet Earth, and on planet Earth, only a small percentage of people have that. But okay, imagine we moved everyone in the universe around, right? So we took all the people with cancer across all the infinite Earths, and we reshuffled the people to be so that every planet was now filled almost exclusively with people who have cancer, right? So we just moved everyone around so that now every planet is filled almost exclusively with people who have cancer.
Yes.
In that case, would you now think that you should think you probably have cancer?
You should think you probably have cancer. Well, depends on if you knew things were rearranged. I imagine we have two scenarios here. One where our Earth retains its same distribution of cancer and non-cancer individuals. And then there's a second scenario where everything's been moved around, and then you kind of like wake up in this world. And
I was imagining. Wait, actually, okay. I think there's a way to press this line, but here's maybe a more. So there are in the multiverse, right? There are going to be some cases where some planets that people are on, where basically everyone at the same time gets cancer, right? So,
okay.
So now, how do you rule out that you're on one of those planets, where basically it has a history up until this point exactly like ours, and then everyone simultaneously gets cancer?
Okay, so now this is a more pernicious form of the objection, I think, and this is where it does indict induction specifically, where we have to assume that the future will resemble the past. And so the question is, in this multiverse, how do we know that the future will resemble the past, and therefore that induction is reliable? I think this is very, very similar to Tim Mawson's objection to the maximal multiverse hypothesis. It's in a paper called We Are Fine-Tuned to the Universe, or something like that. And there, I don't know.
Actually, Tim Mawson's going to be next semester. He's going to be my tutor at Oxford.
Excellent. I love that guy. Tim Mawson's 10 out of 10. He's legit. I met him several times and he gave me an informal tutorial on a paper I was writing that ended up getting published. So he's a real homie. I liked him.
Oh, nice. That's cool.
So yeah, you have a lot to look forward to there. But I don't know what to make of this, because I don't know the ultimate justification for induction anyway in our good old universe. It's a tough one. What solves the problem of induction? What are our grounds anyway for thinking that the future will resemble the past? I don't know. I've never looked into the problem of induction very deeply. So I would want to know how those solutions proposed in the mundane context of a single universe, what those would look like in this multiverse context. And so I think until we get clear on what the grounds for induction's reliability are in the mundane case, it's not going to be obvious how to interpret the significance of worlds where the future goes haywire in a maximal multiverse context. So TBD from Miles on that one.
Yeah, I guess so. I can tell you my preferred solution to the problem of induction.
Sure.
But the thing I'm really confident in is that I think like you lose your justification for induction if you I think the justification for induction will have to be something along the lines of, look, inductive worlds are likelier than non-inductive worlds. But now once you're saying, well, both the inductive worlds and non-inductive worlds are real, and there's no more of one than the other, then then I think
Mm.
it undermines induction.
Yes. I agree with that
Yeah.
conditional claim. If that's all we've got for justifying induction, then the multiverse of this kind will undermine it, and that's a problem. So that much I think.
Yeah, and yeah. Okay. I guess we can talk more about fine tuning. I don't know exactly how long you want to chat for. Happy to. Um,
Let me use the restroom real quick, and then I've got maybe about 20 more minutes if we want to.
All right. Yeah, sounds good.
Discuss something. All right, give me one
Yep.
second. I'm gonna.
Okay, I guess while I'm here. Oh wait, Miles, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
I didn't even see that we have comments.
Yeah. There's some people leaving comments.
That's cool.
Yeah. I guess one other thing I'll say about comparing theism uh, to the Tegmark view and modal realism is like, I don't know. There are lots of other I think theism has the advantage in explaining some other stuff. Like I think theism has a better explanation than psychophysical harmony, for instance, and of than these other views, where I mean, like, I think almost all consciousnesses on modal realism. Well, it's hard to say almost all because it's undefined, but like on modal realism, you would expect your consciousness to be some like very basic like blip, of random chaos. And so the fact that we have this orderly consciousness, I think, is evidence for theism. There are also other objections that people raise to modal realism and to the Tegmark view, like moral objections, where our actions don't have any effects on the totality of reality. I'm a bit more dubious about that one, but there are other objections along the lines of like regarding our modal epistemology that I think where I agree that I don't think modal realism helps our modal epistemology. And I also think theism is this like very parsimonious hypothesis because it takes one of the three fundamental kinds of things, namely consciousness, and then just instantiates it without limit. So God is just a limitless consciousness. And then from that, I think you can do the Swinburne shuffle and get the rest of its properties.
See, I want to agree with Swinburne. I think Robin Collins also wrote a paper being published this year in an anthology looking at the design argument where he argues as well along similar lines that you can go from the fairly circumspect and limited conclusion of the fine-tuning argument to the robust conclusion that a perfect being exists along similar lines. I don't know what to make of those arguments. They strike me as speculative. That's not a well-rehearsed objection. It's just my impression. But I want them to succeed. And so I hope that they do. But I am just skeptical that you can derive the full divine nature from one or two attributes.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you can. I think they succeed. I think that once you have a mind without limits, well, if there's something it can't do or something it's unaware of, these both seem that there are limits on it. There are limits on its awareness or its abilities. And so once you have kind of like a limitless mind or a limitless consciousness, then it would know everything and be able to do everything. So that's so from this one essential property, you get omniscience and omnipotence. And then from there, you can get omnibenevolence because it understands all the moral facts and is thus motivated to follow them. Because I think if you're perfectly rational and you don't have any contrary psychological inclinations, recognizing that something is desirable will motivate you to pursue it. I agree. Maybe it's a little bit speculative. I feel that way to some degree, but I think it is at least plausible enough that if you're not sure if it works, you sort of smear out, then you should think theism has a medium prior. And I think there's lots of evidence for theism. So the evidence will just end up making a bigger difference than the priors.
So these are actually key issues I've been thinking about the last several months. I'm finishing up a paper on the gap problem in the context of the fine-tuning argument. And I'm going to send that off to the Oxford Studies in Philosophy of Religion at the end of the month. And one key component of that paper is looking at this Swinburne-Collins argument.
Oh, cool.
And I think you're right though about the fact that just being uncertain about the conclusion of an argument doesn't mean that it's now evidentially null or that it has no impact upon the relevant probabilities, because in this context they're epistemic probabilities. And so it does cause me to shift my credence to some extent. So I think that's a relevant point that I'll have to grapple with.
Yeah, I guess are there like specific criticisms of it that you levy?
Well, I think my initial impression was that it seems like you're just kind of building in omnipotence and omniscience into the concept of a limitless consciousness. So of course it's going to follow. But then I no longer know how significant a claim that is, that we're really building from one property. I mean, like what is a limit on consciousness? If you just define that as a consciousness is limited to the extent that there's something it cannot do or there's something it doesn't know, well, then of course it's going to follow that such a limitless consciousness is also omniscient and omnipotent. But I'm not sure how significant that claim is.
Right.
I'm not sure how significant it becomes.
I think that a limit is some restriction, some bound on it. So if there's something the consciousness is unaware of, it seems like in some respect it's bounded, in some respect it's restricted. Likewise, if we think the same thing seems true if there's something it can't do. Like you just imagine this like sort of weak God who's like, wanting to move a rock but can't, and you think, yeah, it's limited in that way. Or the God or this mind that wants to know what 5 times 5 is and just can't figure it out and has to do the calculations slowly, and you think okay, that's a limit. And so you just imagine taking a mind without any of that stuff, and then I think from that you get omniscience and omnipotence and thus omnibenevolence. I don't think these are just gerrymandered extra. I think an analogy with modal realism is a good one, where modal realism will build in that every possible world exists, but what there is fundamentally, the modal realist says basically what ultimate reality looks like can be described very simply. That which can be is, And then there are lots of different things that can be, but those follow from this sort of core specification of modal realism. And I think similarly with the theist, God having lots of individual powers and abilities follows from this. But he really just has, but it follows from this kind of simple essential property of just being a limitless mind or a limitless consciousness.
So let's grant the premise that the rest of the properties follow from this one. Why should we carve up the probability space such that an unlimited mind is more likely than any specific limited mind? So a God who can do everything except for alter the course of the Earth's orbit around the sun. It's very specific. And you can create an infinite number of quasi-omnipotent beings just by imagining various combinations of limitations. Why is having unlimited power any more likely or a priori than either specific quasi-omnipotent beings or the whole disjunction of those limited beings?
So I generally think that a simpler hypothesis that takes shorter to specify is better, right? So in order to fully describe what's going on with God, you can describe it with just there's a limitless consciousness, and that's very simple. You take a fundamental thing without limits, and so I think if you invoke only fundamental entities and you don't place any limits on it, that's like maximally simple and elegant. Now, so I think that's the reason why the limitless designer is better than any very, very specific and complicated designer, like a God who can do everything except one thing. I also think just intuitively it seems way more likely. Like it just seems like obviously more likely that there's a God that can do everything than there is a God who can do everything except move around French fries or something. Now, the latter question is trickier about why I think God is likelier than the disjunct of all the limited designers. I think there, generally a theory takes a really big hit by being adding these arbitrary limits that also add to complexity. So, for example, if we compare the theory that, so imagine that the universe, the laws of nature are, imagine that the universe is infinite in size. The theory that the laws of nature are completely uniform throughout the universe is, I think, infinitely likelier than, sorry, not infinitely likelier, is likelier than the disjunct of all the theories on which the laws of nature like break down in one little patch, even though there are an infinite number of them. So I think for a similar reason, theism will be likelier because it doesn't have this extra element of arbitrariness and complexity.
Yes. So Callum Miller makes the same point in his paper, Is Theism a Simple Hypothesis, or something along those lines. And so I found great inspiration from that idea. And I'm working with it. I'm toying with these ideas. But I think if there is a way here to argue for theism's higher intrinsic or prior probability, it's along these lines. So again, I'm still agnostic, but I incline to agree with this chain of reasoning. I just want to make it more rigorous. I want to make it as rigorous as possible. And so that's part of what my paper is doing.
Yeah, nice. What sounds like an interesting paper. Okay, so I guess regarding fine-tuning, do you agree with me that the multiverse is the most promising atheistic response to fine-tuning? I mean, sorry, to to fine-tuning.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think that the two that are the biggest trouble are the multiverse and the electrons and love argument. I think the electrons and love argument doesn't work at all if it's supposed to fully defang the fine-tuning argument. Or like if you want to, it's very improbable that the probability of God finally tuning the universe is just as low as the probability of God making a finely tuned universe is just as low as the probability of a fine-tuned universe on naturalism, where you apply the principle of indifference across the different possible values of the constants.
Mhm.
But I think it. So I don't think it can fully defang the fine-tuning argument, but I think it can serve in conjunction with some explanation to say, well, this isn't that likely on theism, and here's an explanation of fine-tuning. Yeah, I guess what are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you share my assessment about the electrons and love argument regarding that?
So I think, yeah. So briefly, I think it'd be helpful to state that argument.
Yeah, I should. Well, I'm really a terrible host here.
No.
Bringing up
You're
all
fine.
these
I do that
arguments,
stuff.
forgetting to.
I do that all the time too, and then I watch the video back and I go, "Oh, I just really ran with it," and just plowed ahead without explaining. So the electrons and love argument from Sinhababu's paper, very interesting, but the idea is that God could have made it the case that states of consciousness were not linked to brain states at all, and didn't even require the same kind of complex physical substratum. He could have made it the case that two electrons could have fully fledged minds and conscious lives and even fall in love with each other. So in our universe, there seem to be certain psychophysical laws dictating the connection between certain physical states and certain psychological or mental states. One of them is roughly that to have consciousness as rich as we do, you have to have something as complex as a physical brain to underwrite it. That there's no way in our universe for two electrons to have consciousness akin to us and to fall in love. But God could have made it the case that there was. He could have made it the case that anything and everything could serve as a substratum of consciousness. So I take the import of that to be that we now have severed the connection between the likelihood of God creating conscious agents and the likelihood of a fine-tuned universe. Because unless we can show that the specific psychophysical laws that exist within our universe have a high likelihood given theism, then it just won't follow that fine-tuning has a high likelihood given theism, even if conscious agents have a high likelihood given theism. Because God's wanting to create conscious agents just won't entail that there's a fine-tuned universe, because God could have made a universe where two electrons could have fallen in love, and that wouldn't have been fine-tuned in the sense in which our universe is fine-tuned, because the psychophysical laws would have been different. So I think that the right way to proceed here is to just include in the background information the specific psychophysical laws that we have. And in that case, if we say, given that these psychophysical laws obtain, ones that dictate that to have consciousness, you need to have a functioning brain, well, then it will follow that if God wants to create conscious agents, if it's non-negligibly likely that God creates conscious agents, then it just follows automatically that it's non-negligibly likely that God designs a physical fine-tuned universe to house them, because we've already delimited the space of possibility to those where our psychophysical laws hold.
Okay, that's interesting. I think maybe, I think what maybe the naturalist would say is that you only get to delimit something if it's not evidentially relevant, if it doesn't favor either side.
Yes.
And then Agreed. They would say, well, that the probability, let me see. Yeah, no, I think that response might work. I mean, yeah, because it is not clear whether the psychophysical laws themselves are likelier on theism versus naturalism.
Right, because that was my point that I made, not to plug my own work, but here you go. In my paper, Divine Psychology and Cosmic Fine-Tuning, available for free online, folks. The point I made was that, as far as I can tell, our psychophysical laws are no more likely on naturalism than on theism. If we define naturalism in a general sort of way. Like we could define the psychophysical laws into the naturalistic hypothesis, but that's not going to do anything in the final analysis to just define the evidence into the hypothesis. And so if that's the case, well, then it is evidentially insignificant. You can take it as background. Just as I think you can take the laws of nature, the mathematical form of the laws of nature as background. That further delimits the scope of possibility, such that if you can show that God wants to create conscious agents, well, given that our laws of nature exist, that these laws of nature exist, and given that these psychophysical laws exist, well, then a fine-tuned universe is precisely what you would expect, given theism.
Yeah. I mean, I worry. So, like, maybe then the fine. Well, so I think actually the psychophysical laws are evidence for theism.
Yeah.
Because I think most psychophysical laws would produce either nothing of value or random chaos.
Yes.
But yeah, so I guess, yeah, do you have
that's not I mean, that actually is a complementary point. If the psychophysical laws are actually evidence for theism, well, then you wouldn't include it in the background information. You couldn't. But then it just helps the case. It doesn't hurt it.
Yeah. Yeah, this might be right. I'm not sure. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a clever point.
Yeah, something to think about. Because I was intrigued to go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say my intuition here was only reinforced as I looked into the Paul Draper's work on the principle or the requirement of total evidence, because he has a nice way of using the odds form of Bayes' theorem to show that sometimes the certain specific features of evidence, they just cancel out in our final evaluation of the odds of one hypothesis against another, because neither hypothesis makes those specifics any more likely. So if you can show that that condition is satisfied, and that really is the key claim, then I think you're doing fine. But that would be, I think, the most controversial premise of my response, is that the psychophysical laws are no more likely given naturalism than theism.
Yeah.
And then obviously, if they're more likely given theism, I don't think that's going to do anything to hurt the theist case. It's only going to help it when you work it all out.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it might be that. So maybe here's maybe how the naturalist could reply that yes, okay, the psychophysical laws as a whole might not support naturalism over theism, right? So, and maybe they'll even support theism, but there's one specific component of the psychophysical laws which supports naturalism, which is that the psychophysical laws give rise to consciousness among kind of like mid-level well, no, actually, no, I don't think this is right. No, what I was going to say was that they give rise to like consciousness among mid-level structures, where they where they give rise to consciousness not among atoms and electrons, but among like complex brains like ours. But I don't even, I don't even think that is right. I think that's actually probably wrong. Like on naturalism, what I would expect most is like a kind of panpsychism where only atoms are conscious, because it would consciousness just working the way the other psychophysical laws work.
Right. I mean, that point about the necessity of comparison between theism and naturalism, I think, is going to prove detrimental to these kind of responses. That it's very unlikely that God would create mid-level beings as those that could be conscious rather than atoms. Well, fine, but again, what's the probability on naturalism that macroscopic objects would be conscious and not atoms? Well, if it's the same, then it's irrelevant, and if it's less, then we actually have evidence for theism. But I don't think there's any reason to think naturalism makes the probability that our psychophysical laws would be such that macroscopic objects would be conscious any higher than theism.
Yeah, this is a good point. Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. Okay, regarding the multiverse, which we both think is the best objection, I guess what do you think about the multiverse? What do you think are the best responses?
Well, that is a future area of investigation in my kind of large scale research program of examining the fine-tuning argument, because I want to eventually holistically assess the fine-tuning argument, but it's such a massive topic that it's going to take a long time. So evaluating the multiverse is part of that project, but I've yet to really get into it. I think the Boltzmann brain problem is probably the most threatening issue with the multiverse. And as far as I'm aware, there are no scientific models of the multiverse, the viable ones that avoid this problem, at least yet. And I think you'll also get into very similar issues that we encountered when talking about comparing infinities with respect to the multiverse. You'll encounter the measure problem. How do we actually argue that certain sets of observers are more probable or likely given an infinite world ensemble than others? And so one of those two will prove an issue. I mean, if the measure problem really is a problem, the Boltzmann brain problem doesn't arise, but you still have the measure problem to deal with in order to argue that the multiverse is, or that a fine-tuned universe obtains within the multiverse. But if the measure problem isn't a problem, if we can solve it, if we can say that certain observers are more likely than others, well, then a Boltzmann brain, it seems, is more likely, far and away more likely than any other kind of observer. And so then you, and if you regard that as a negative implication, thinking that you are a Boltzmann brain, then you ought to reject the multiverse. But that's kind of the surface. I realize that's a surface level analysis of the issues, and that's as far as I could go because that's all I know. But
Yeah,
I don't know of any.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah,
It says, I'm looking at a comment here that says, could y'all explain the measure problem or maybe point me towards something that does? Did you want to, or I can't? It's up to you.
You can go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, the rough and ready idea is that if you have two infinite quantities, it's very difficult to say that one contains more than the other. And so then if you have an infinite number of, say, observers in a multiverse having observations Y, and an infinite number of observers in a multiverse having observations X, well, how do you say that observations Y are more likely than observations X, or vice versa? It kind of gets back to the thought experiment of the having one galaxy with 1,000 undeceived people and one deceived person. So then it becomes quite likely that you are undeceived. And then if you replicate that galaxy an infinite number of times, well, then it still seems likely that you are undeceived. Every galaxy here has 1,000 undeceived and one deceived. But that's just a question of arrangement, because the number of deceived people in this infinite collection is equal to the number of undeceived. And merely by rearranging the people in each galaxy, you can, without changing the number of people or annihilating anyone, you can make it the case that each galaxy has 1,000 deceived people and one undeceived. And you did nothing to the actual number of people or to the individual people. You annihilated no one. And so this seems to indicate that in an infinite ensemble or collection, it's very difficult to generate predictions from the multiverse about which observations we should be having, given that there seemingly are an infinite number of people that have every single observation, at least from within this selection of observable universes. And so this is an objection to the multiverse as a scientific account. It's going to be very difficult to draw out predictions for what we should observe, and therefore very difficult to see how the multiverse could ever be testable. And I assume then the implications of the measure problem are wider than this, but that's the one that scientists struggle with.
Yeah. Is
that basically right?
Yeah, that is right. I also think there is a relationship between the measure problem and the Boltzmann brain problem, where, I mean,
Yes.
so the reason why you get the predominance of Boltzmann brains, I mean, it's for a few reasons. One of them is that our world has unusually low entropy. And so if you think that sort of like you need fine tuning to get to explain, and sorry, entropy is like how ordered or disordered a world is. Higher entropy means more like disorder. Now, a higher entropy world is likelier to give rise to Boltzmann brains. You won't have as much stable complexity to get a world like ours, but you will be able to get Boltzmann brains. So you don't get, so you get a predominance of Boltzmann brains in a low entropy world. And sorry, in a high entropy world, you get mostly Boltzmann brains. And fine tuning for low entropy is one kind of fine tuning. So sort of by default, it seems like the multiverses result in that. In addition, like the worlds that are non-finely tuned, as far as I understand, those can still give rise to Boltzmann brains by accident. And so because there are so many more non-finely tuned worlds than finely tuned worlds, then can you give rise to Boltzmann brains by chance? I mean, it's not that likely that they will sometimes, that you get a predominance of Boltzmann brains. And then the last point is just that even in our world, so the second law of thermodynamics is entropy increases over time in a vacuum. This is a fairly broad general feature. Aaron Wall, who's a physicist with a really good blog that I'd recommend you all check out, is he was explaining to me that the second law of thermodynamics, that entropy increases over time, will follow for any set of laws that are reversible. That is to say, where if you know its state at some time, you can figure out there's some procedure you can do to figure out what its state is at a previous time. And so with our world, right, entropy is going to increase over time. So there's going to be this finite amount of time of order, and then followed by an infinity of like very high entropy of chaos that can give rise to Boltzmann brains. And so even the finely tuned universes have only a finite number of years of order, and then have an infinite number of years of only giving rise to Boltzmann brains. And so then it just seems like by default, you get way more Boltzmann brains after heat death than you get finely tuned agents. So yeah, I think the Boltzmann brain thing, I mean, I don't understand the physics. I only understand the philosophy and have read a little bit about what people say about the physics. So, don't trust what I have to say, but I do think it is a pretty big problem. Like it seems like you need to like have kind of a pretty high degree of gerrymandering to,
and I think
not get a predominance of Boltzmann brains.
And I think physicists agree with you. I mean, that's why they're trying to craft models of the multiverse that don't have this problem, because they recognize it's a significant problem. But I think the point that was impressed to me after talking with these two rabbis who host the Physics to God podcast, and there's a video of my conversation with them on my YouTube channel, they proved to be some of the most articulate exponents or proponents of the fine-tuning argument that I've ever heard. So I really do recommend that conversation. But the point I made with them, or that became clear, was that if the measure problem is a problem or is insoluble, there's no longer a Boltzmann brain problem. So it's kind of an either or here in terms of the objection to the multiverse, because after all, let's assume the measure problem is insoluble. Well, then there's no way to argue that Boltzmann brains are more probable or likely in a multiverse than ordinary observers, because there are an infinite number of either one. So if you can't solve the measure problem, there's no Boltzmann brain problem, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think the Boltzmann brain problem makes the measure problem more difficult, because it seems like if you just expand, but just by kind of like most normal ways of counting observers, you end up with the result that most observers are Boltzmann brains, unless you do some shenanigans. Even if you just think like entropy will keep increasing in our world, even if you don't believe in a multiverse, I think the rising entropy will make it likely that you're a Boltzmann brain. I think this is a problem. The other, I guess I have a few other objections to a multiverse other than this. Mm-hmm. One of them is, this is sort of similar to what we were talking about regarding the limited deity, where I think a multiverse is a complex and improbable sort of thing. So there's the element of fine tuning, which comes from the discoveries of physics. But then there's also just this more basic conceptual point of it's more likely that the world would produce either random chaos or nothing interesting than it would produce anything interesting. That you'd even get a series of laws that give rise to interesting structures. So, like, if we just think about all the simplest ways the laws could be, like, it'd be very simple for every particle to just move in a line, or for them to all collapse in on each other, or for them to all just disappear after 1 second, or for them to move in a circle pattern. Like, there are all these ways that the world could be where it wouldn't produce anything interesting. And these seem simpler than our physics. So it's very surprising that we happen to get one of the set of laws that's in the Goldilocks zone between simplicity and complexity, where it was complicated enough to give rise to anything interesting, but simple enough to not produce random chaos. Now, and I just think a multiverse, like, if you have a universe generator, it's like, well, why do you have a universe generator rather than something really simple, or rather than random chaos? I think it pushes it back a level. This is a point that Robin Collins has made. And then I also think that you need a kind of weird if you think that there's not just fine tuning for the constants, but also for the laws and initial conditions. Well, you need some very weird fine tuning in order to get the fine tuning to vary the laws, constants, and the initial conditions. Like, just conditional on there being a multiverse of any sort, even if it varies some stuff, it's unlikely it would vary all three. And then lastly, one thing Robin Collins has been arguing for is that there's fine tuning for discoverability, where basically there are parameters set in physics that are ideal for scientific discovery. Now, even if the world weren't discoverable, we could have still found ourselves in it. Yeah. So for that reason, no, the Collins proposal is kind of speculative, but I don't know. Like, my sense is it's more controversial among physicists and hasn't been vetted that much. But if it's right, then I agree that then it seems like another problem.
Yeah, that's as far as I would go on the discoverability point as well, is that if it's correct, if that scientific point is right, then that constitutes an independent objection to the multiverse. It'll just remains to be seen how the physics community will respond to his points. They may well realize that, or be unable to undermine the discoveries and the implications of what he's discovered, but it just kind of remains to be seen, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Are there? Should we wrap up around now? Do you have any closing thoughts about fine tuning? Any things you want to say that you haven't yet?
Just as a closing point of overview, I do think it is the most sophisticated theistic argument that I've encountered. It seems to be the one that is most resilient in the face of objections, and that has the most potential to ultimately succeed. And maybe that's a function of the fact that it's the only argument I've examined at this depth. But, for instance, I've read a fair bit into the Kalam cosmological argument. I probably read everything William Lane Craig has ever written on it. And so that leaves the more modern formulations untouched. Maybe those work. But the fact that scientists and philosophers both take at least key components of the fine-tuning argument seriously suggests to me that we ought to take it seriously. That doesn't mean that it does ultimately succeed, but it means that its chances of doing so are enough that we should pay attention. And my belief in that fact has only been solidified as a result of my prolonged study of the argument. And so I'm happy I picked it, and I look forward to seeing what happens as I continue to write and think and debate it. Yeah,
I agree. I think there are a few other arguments that I think have around as much force as the fine-tuning argument. But what's nice about the fine-tuning argument is I think it has, like, it's easy to explain. You can explain it to a person in 30 seconds, the core idea, and yet you get into it and it ends up being this really sophisticated argument. Lots of things can be said in its favor. And I've studied the objections, and I kind of my assessment is basically I don't think there are any objections that are very good. You can come up with other explanations of fine tuning, but ultimately they're going to be less plausible. And yeah, I think fine tuning it's a major chip in favor of theism.
Yes. Yes, I agree.
Okay, two brief questions before we go. One of them is: Are there other arguments for God that you think are good, along with fine tuning? Like what if any are other arguments that you find to be fairly successful?
Well, I think that if, when the dust settles, the empirical evidence does indicate that the universe began to exist, then we'll have equally significant evidence for theism. I realize there are attempts to show that you could have a completely uncaused beginning of the universe, but I just think those attempts are desperate, and that if nothing else, if you told me that the universe had this absolute beginning, I would be far more likely to conclude that there was a cause that brought the universe into being than that it just literally happened for no reason at all with no cause whatsoever. Even if I can't attach specific numbers to the relative likelihoods, it's clear enough to me that if the universe began to exist, then there's something that brought it into being. Now, that's not to then affirm kind of the William Lane Craig-esque fairly simple arguments for then connecting a cause of the universe to personal creator. But I just think that if I found out the universe did begin to exist, that would cause a significant increase in my credence of theism. So I would say I'm at least open-minded with respect to a version of the Kalam cosmological argument. Aside from that, I have to just be largely agnostic about the success or failure of other theistic arguments. Because if they have at all the same level of complexity as the fine-tuning argument, well, then I have barely scratched the surface on these other considerations, like arguments from consciousness or the moral argument, or the argument from the applicability of mathematics. Perhaps the argument from the applicability of mathematics would be most likely, in my mind, to succeed along with the fine-tuning argument. But that's because it's so similar. And it draws from similar discoveries in astrophysics and in physics generally. So I suppose I am most inclined to those empirical or scientifically grounded arguments, just because I have grown more skeptical of a priori reasoning and intuition-based arguments as I've gotten older. So I guess, stated in the most cynical way, I'm at least subjectively most responsive to empirical arguments, as opposed to, say, the moral argument, which obviously there might be some empirically relevant points, but appealing to God as an explanation for morality just doesn't involve scientific evidence in the same kind of way. So the unsatisfying answer is that there may well be other successful theistic arguments. I don't know them nearly as well as I know the fine-tuning argument, and so I have the intellectual humility to say they might work, they might not. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, okay, sounds like, you're a more intellectually virtuous guy than I am. I take, all these very strong views on all these different arguments, but I guess I am not a big fan of the Kalam, but that's
Sure.
a topic for another day. All right, the last question. So are you religious, or are you just sort of a generic theist?
Yes, I'm religious, but I think that means something different to me than what pops into most people's head when they hear the term religious. At least
sorry,
in America. Go ahead.
You cut out so that I didn't hear the beginning part of your answer.
Oh, I said yes. I said okay. Yes, but that to me, when I say I'm religious, that probably means something different than what pops into most people's heads when they hear that designation, particularly in an American context. When someone says they're religious, it conjures up manifold images of conservative evangelicalism, and I don't identify with that tradition. So I would say that I am wrestling with most religiously significant questions. I'm agnostic on most of them. I believe that God exists. I still identify as broadly Christian, but I'm exploring, for instance, radical revisions of a conservative Christian worldview anyway. And I have a great affinity with the theologian Randall Rouser, if you know him. He's been on
Yeah,
my
yeah.
channel now twice, and I've been utterly stunned by the level of sophistication of the things that he has to say, because of my bias, my upbringing as a conservative Christian, I thought of progressive Christianity as just a utterly unsophisticated, really attempt to live your life without actually being religious, that there's no substance to it. But through interaction with Randall's work, I'm changing my mind. So that would be the long-winded answer to your question.
All right, nice, interesting. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I enjoyed the discussion. Yeah, I have your YouTube channel linked below.
Yeah.
Anything else of yours that people should? Oh, I should have linked your paper as probably.
Yes, my extremely manifold scholarship of 3 papers you should check out. They're
well,
pretty good, I think.
Many fine people have 3 papers.
They do indeed, Matthew. They do.
Yeah, I think if you have more than 3 papers, at that point you're just showing off. I think 3 is the perfect number of papers.
Yeah, Joe Schmidt. Just kidding.
Yeah. For audience members who are not clued on this, I also have 3 papers, so hence the jokes about it. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I now have added the links to the papers in the description. I think. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone. Miles, thanks for coming on. Yeah, I enjoyed the discussion. Always nice chatting.
Course.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.